Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. Today's conversation is with Michael Thurber, who is also known as Michael T. Michael is a bass player, band leader, arranger, composer, and a hell of a character. He's young by my standards these days. He's in his mid-20s. But already he's accomplished a lot, and he's accomplished it in a way most young musicians wouldn't necessarily even think to do. As a bass player, he's played with a number of great jazz musicians, perhaps the most notable of whom is his good friend, the piano player Jonathan Batiste. In our conversation, he talks quite a bit about the importance of his friendship with Batiste. In 2012, with two friends, he started Collective Cadenza, or CDZA, a group that creates experimental music videos, generally featuring young virtuosic performers. Michael tells the story of how they filmed their first video almost as a lark, and within the first day of posting it to YouTube, it had over 600,000 views. Today, the CDZA videos have been seen over 25 million times, and the group has performed all over the world at YouTube and Google conferences. They were featured prominently in the 2013 YouTube Music Awards, and in the CDZA videos, Michael is often seen playing bass or conducting a larger ensemble, and also grooving, announcing, dancing, jumping, shouting, laughing, directing, opening bottles of champagne, and generally entertaining. He is a born entertainer. Michael has also become a prolific writer of music for theater. One of his most recent projects, a reimagining of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, is currently being staged at the Public Theater in New York. This was a rather free-flowing conversation that we had late one recent night. The first part of the interview focused on Michael's development and education, and the second half really clicked into some great insight about how he sees music informing his generation. His creative process also we talked about, and his overall outlook on life. It's a bit of a longer episode, but well worth it, I think. There were a few things in particular that jumped out at me listening back to this talk. The first was the importance of learning how to learn, as he calls it. The second was how true to himself he is, and how compelling that is to the people around him. And finally, there was the fact that he suffered a number of blows in his musical development that could have really set him back, but instead ended up leading him to find a unique and personal way to persevere and ultimately thrive. I don't know if you can tell, but I really like this guy. Before we get started with the conversation, here's the audio from the very first CDZA video, which we discuss later. It's called The History of Lyrics That Aren't Lyrics, and it features Michael on bass, and he also did the arrangement.
Do-a-dee-dee-dee-dum-dee-dee-doo. Do-a-dee-dee-dee-dum-dee-dee-doo.
La
Michael Thurber,
Leo Sidran.
welcome to the third story.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here.
This is happening.
It's amazing. I am so happy that it's happening. It's a beautiful thing.
I'm not surprised that you're happy that it's happening because you are a happy dude.
Hey, man, somebody's got to do it.
Yeah. We met a couple of years ago through social connection. I remember the email that you sent me, which was super positive and basically just, we have a ton of people in common. I'd love to get together. Let's hook up. This is a small world. We have this friend in common from back in the Midwest. We also know people in New York. Let's hang. That energy was so contagious and that enthusiasm was so powerful that I just wrote to you and I was like, yes.
Man, that's funny that you say that. I actually felt the same way because when we first actually met up, it was at Rockwood Music Hall. You were totally supportive and encouraging. Like right away when I walked up, you were like, man, like I saw this thing that you just wrote a score for. It was really cool. And I was at a place where most of the people that I had met in New York at that point always had their guard up or always had like a vibe that they were trying to kick at you. And you were immediately like, man, you know, really great stuff. Awesome to meet you. I was waiting to meet somebody that was like that down to earth and just that real, you know?
Well, I think that gives us a good segue into where you come from and where I come from too, because we're both a couple of Midwestern boys.
We are.
Let loose in the big city.
Guilty as charged.
So you're originally from Michigan.
I've lived around the Midwest a little bit. I grew up in Indiana because my dad was moving around a lot when we were young.
What was he doing?
He works in the oil industry. He's an environmental engineer. So he would work on different oil rigs and eventually was working in Chicago. So from the age of 6 to 15, I lived in Indiana because he was working in Chicago and we lived right across the border. So I grew up there, but my parents were originally from Michigan. When I got to high school, I didn't want to go to like a public school anymore because I was really serious about music at that point. I was like, well, you know, if you guys are going to move, like I don't know what to do. I don't want to go back to a public school where I've got to like do a bunch of stuff that's not music. So I ended up going to Interlochen, which is in northern Michigan in Traverse City. That sort of got me really involved in Michigan. I mean, all my childhood friends are from Indiana, but now I feel like I'm from Michigan because I went to high school there and had like a really, you know, powerful experience there and stuff.
How were you already so involved in music by the time you were high school age? When did you really become interested in music?
You know, I was always into it. It's funny because my family is not, I don't have any professional musicians on either side of my family, but I have artists in my family. My grandfathers on both sides were really, really creative people. I sort of always fed off of that. And my dad played piano and guitar, so I was always sort of around instruments. My biggest musical influence was my brother. I have an older brother who's 3.5 years older, and he somehow, like magically, man, because now with the internet, you take it for granted because it's like you can look up anything and you can find anything. But this was in like the mid to late 90s, and my brother knew about everything. Like I was 12 years old in Indiana, and my brother was like, you should check out Miles Davis Kind of Blue. It's like, what? Like, how did he even know about that, you know? But he was on like the early side of the internet. So whatever blogs did exist at that time, he was all about them. And he subscribed to magazines, like zines were like a thing. And he was like really involved in the skateboard culture, which has a really great taste in music actually. And so in all the videos that would come out in all the magazines, there's always be, you know, great like Otis Redding music or like Madlib, like a, you know, hip hop artist that would sample all of this great jazz. And like through that, he would discover like, oh, the sample from that song is actually like a Herbie Hancock sample or something. And so then he would go and explore all that. And I was basically like a sponge that would just take all that stuff in. Anything he said I should listen to, I would listen to. And that was really like my biggest musical influence, because I didn't have access to any of that. There were no great orchestras or great jazz clubs or great rock clubs, for that matter.
To see anything live. You couldn't see live music.
There was nothing. Yeah. I mean, there were bar bands, which was a huge influence on me too. To this day, I mean, I love playing in bars, playing Jimmy Buffett and Bob Seger and stuff, which is amazing. I mean, that had a big impact on me. But other than that, yeah, there wasn't a lot of access to other types of music or performance art at all.
And did you pick up the bass originally, or did you start with a different instrument first?
I started with bass, which is so funny, man, because most people started on bass guitar, or they were drummers or guitar players or piano players, and then they wind up landing on bass as like a compromise. Somebody in the band is like, oh, I don't want to play bass. And so some guy ends up like filling in for him. But for me, I started right away on upright bass. It was at Choose Your Own Instrument Day. So it was like 6th grade. They have the day where like all of the instruments are out and you can just show up and you can pick whatever you want. And they had a bass there. And I was like, fuck yeah. I don't even know why I was into it. But I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that one. Before that, I had played guitar and drums and piano and stuff, but just like listening to stuff that was on the radio, like learning hip-hop songs and learning alternative rock was big at that time. So I knew all the Nirvana songs, all the Green Day songs, stuff on the radio. So, I mean, I was always into picking stuff up, but I got to a point where I wanted to learn more about music, and the only access that I had was at public school orchestra, like classical music. So that was really how I got into classical music. Like before that, I have memories of like my dad playing Mozart and stuff in the house, but he was by no means a classical music buff. I mean, he played just as much Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder and Eric Clapton and stuff as he did anything else. But I wanted to get serious about music, and the only way to do it in Indiana was through the public school orchestra. And so I was like, well, if this is the way to do it, then I want to study classical music. I remember right away, like the first month of orchestra, I came home and I told my parents, I was like, I'm going to be a professional musician. And I was 12 or 13.
And you remember what that felt like?
Oh yeah, man. It was amazing. It was a place that I could go during the school day that I really liked. You know, it was like an hour of the day where I really felt like I had a reason to be there. I never felt that way in any other classes. I mean, I was always an okay student. Like I would always show up and do whatever I had to do, but I didn't like it. I wasn't into any of the other classes. And in orchestra, I felt like that was a place where I could really do my thing. Like I was really genuinely interested. And that was where I started to learn about learning. Like that was the first place that I felt super, super activated. You know, like my brain really was like firing on all cylinders. And I was really excited about whatever anybody would say. Not just the teacher, but like other students too. If they said anything about what it was like to play or the experience that we had playing or what it was playing their instrument, I was always just super interested in that. I didn't have the discipline really yet. I knew I wanted to be a professional musician, but I didn't know what that actually would take. I figured that out a few years later. By the time I was 15, that was when I was like doing like 8 hours a day type of stuff.
So let's talk about that. You made the choice to go to Interlochen, which is basically like a boarding school. Yeah.
Well, so actually, right before that, what happened was before my parents moved from Indiana to Michigan, I dropped out of high school. I was in public high school. I did my freshman year. I was just like, this is miserable because I was in a public school. There's like 3,000 kids in the school. And I was just like, I'm here for 8 hours a day and I'm not learning anything and I don't like it. And so I was like, I can't do this. And my parents, who have always been awesome, always been super supportive, they were like, well, then you should leave and we should figure out something else. I didn't know that a place like Interlochen existed. So I did homeschooling for the second half of my sophomore year. So I left high school and did a program, what was it called? Like the American Academy or something. And they would send me books and I would read them and then send in tests and mail them back. And I could do all of my work, everything, like math, American history, literature, in like 2 hours a day. Because really, I mean, not to get on a different topic, but if you really boil it down to what you're actually learning or what you actually have to do in a work day or a school day. It's like, it's not, if you're focused, it's not actually that much time. And so I would do 2 hours of schoolwork in the morning, and then I would practice. And I was playing upright and electric. On electric, I would watch the Jaco Pastorius interview video where Jerry Jamot, amazing bass player, would interview Jaco and talk to him about stuff. And I learned everything that Jaco ever recorded. Tore the frets out of my bass, all that stuff. And I was playing upright bass too. So I was studying Simandl technique on the upright bass and Petrarchy and thumb position. And I had a private teacher, but I would only meet with him every 2 weeks because it was in Indiana and it was like a 45-minute drive. And so it was all very self-motivated out of books and out of videos and stuff. And I would write a little bit, try to begin writing music, and I would study jazz and do Jamie Abersol books and like just anything I could get my hands on. When my parents moved to Michigan, I was afraid, because this whole time I had friends because I'd lived in Indiana all the time. So I wasn't with them at school, but I could still hang out with them at night. But when my parents moved to Michigan, I got scared because I was like, if I don't meet anybody and I'm homeschooling, I'm going to become like a hobbit.
Sure.
You know? So that was when I was like, well, I don't want to go back to public school, but I don't want to just not meet anybody. And my parents had heard about Interlochen because they were originally from Michigan. So I ended up going there, and that really changed my life.
So what was that experience like, arriving at Interlochen as a junior in high school?
The most pivotal moment in my life to this day. That was when all of this ambition and all of this, like, I want to be a professional musician, really met the reality of like, this is, you can actually do this, and there's other people out there that are doing it too, and this is what it's going to take, you know? Prior to that, it was all just in my head, you know?
And then you found yourself at a school with people who had shared the same ambition.
Same ambition, and were even better. Like the first day I showed up, I met this girl, Ijung Soo. She's amazing, amazing bass player, a virtuoso, classical, upright bassist. She barely spoke English. So there I am, I'm 16, and I'm meeting this girl who doesn't even speak my language and is a virtuoso, amazing, at 16 years old, is like playing the fuck out of the bass, you know? And it's like, there's 400 other kids that are just like that. I live with a guy, Sushi Hori from Japan, who's an amazing violin virtuoso. And it's like, and barely spoke English too. And it's like, I'm living with all of these people and experiencing all of this. And it was like so humbling and so mind blowing. And also it's like, you're out on your own. It was a college experience. Yeah. It was like college came early. And as much as Interlochen is sheltered and they do a really good job of supporting you and stuff, I mean, you're living by yourself, you know, it's a college experience.
And the teachers, were there any particular teachers there that helped you get your technique together?
It was a very bass specific time. Like as my life went on, a whole bunch of stuff happened and I wound up becoming more of sort of like a multifaceted type of musician. But at that time it was all about bass. So Derek Weller really helped me. Bill Sears runs the big band up there. And I took an improv class with him. So even then I was playing like jazz and classical at the same time. I'd play in the orchestra in the morning. Then my second hour was jazz band. And then I'd have a private lesson, you know, once or twice a week. Then we'd have music theory. And we only had like 2 or 3 academics, and it was amazing.
Was it unusual, even in high school, to be splitting your time between classical and jazz? Or was that something that other musicians were doing as well, other peers were doing?
The only other guy that was doing it was my best friend at Interlochen, Ross Mincer, who's Bob Mincer's nephew, an amazing saxophone player and an awesome musician. And he and I hit it off because he was really the only other guy that I could see there that was trying to do a bunch of different stuff.
Most of the people there were kind of selecting either one path or another path.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think, you know, I think that was encouraged, which I think is a healthy thing. It's like, you know, teachers and just academia in general is trying to help people out and trying to catch like sort of like what in general is probably a good idea for people, you know. So I think that's good. But I right away knew that I didn't want to. And I mean, it was stressful, you know, because the demands of the classes were very specific and wouldn't let down. So it's like you had to do a lot of work. And I would sit in on the composition classes too. So I was writing music at that time too. And my teachers were cool. And, you know, we would perform my music and my friend Ross's music. They were accommodating, very accommodating and like open to me exploring. But at the same time, it was definitely something that I drove. Like, it was not a path that was laid out. Like, you can study all these things. It was sort of like once I said I was interested in doing that, they were very supportive. And that was like, that had an influence on me too, because now I don't think about genre now. Like, I'm comfortable enough with myself and just with what I think music is and stuff that I don't really think about that anymore. But at that time, I wasn't there yet. It was really a conscious divide for me. Like, I would think about, well, now I'm in classical mode and now I'm in jazz mode. And, subconsciously, I could see the connections. Like, I'd be playing an orchestra and I'd be like, oh, I'm playing the third of a chord right now, which is more of the way that the jazz education was working at that time, where you were always an analyzer at the same time as you were thinking about being a technician. You know what I mean? So I could see the connections happening, but it wasn't really there yet, So it was stressful. Like, and I've always sort of been like I like to work and I like to be busy all the time. But at that time, I didn't have as much of a grip on it. So there was definitely some moments where it was like, whoa, this is a lot.
And were you playing in bands also at that time?
Yeah. I mean, we were playing rock and jazz and funk and classical music and everything, playing in an orchestra, playing in a big band, literally just everything, man. We would transpose, Bach 2-part inventions to play on bass and tenor, like in 2 parts, anything, just anything.
After Interlochen, was there any question about where you wanted to go?
I wanted to go to Curtis in Philadelphia because Edgar Meyer taught there. And Edgar Meyer to this day is my hero. To this day, he's probably one of my biggest musical influences. I think he's a genius. And it's not just like a bass thing. It's like a composition thing and just a personality thing. I relate to his music so much. He was teaching at Curtis. I think he still is. And so I wanted to go there to study with him. And I put all my eggs in the Curtis basket. And I showed up and I had an amazing audition. And it lasted like 45 minutes long. And the vibe was so cool, man. And we were hanging out. And I even played him some of my original stuff on bass. And it was amazing. I was like, man, I think I got in. Like, this is awesome. So the next day, I had my audition at Juilliard. So I was with a friend. We drove up to New York, and I had my audition at Juilliard the next day. I never really actually had a dream of going to Juilliard. I thought New York was amazing, but I didn't want to go to Juilliard. So when I showed up for the audition, I was just like, whatever, man. And so I just walked in, threw the bass out of the case. They have like a staff accompanist there that like plays with you, played, and then left. I was just like, whatever, because in my mind, I was like thrilled that I had a good Curtis audition. So then a couple weeks later, I find out that I didn't get into Curtis. I was devastated, but Juilliard called and they were like, you got in. And they were like, we have a little bit of a scholarship that we can give you and stuff. And I thought, well, I didn't get into Curtis and New York would be awesome. So I'll go there. It was one of those decisions that wound up being the best decision ever because I'm here now and I love what's going on and I love New York and I love everything that's happening in my life and my career now. But at that time, it was the beginning of a big turning point in a very difficult period because I wasn't super excited about going to Juilliard. And in that immediacy, like in those few years, it actually opened up kind of a dark period for me where I went through a lot of stuff physically and emotionally and kind of went into like a couple years of like turbulence, which, wound up all being okay. But at that time, man, it was like, yeah. When I got there, they had sent me like a month early, like a packet of all the stuff for the placement audition when I got there. And I'm the kind of guy that like, I get excited and I'm proactive and stuff, So when they sent me this packet, I didn't practice it at all. And that was a sign to me immediately because that's not my style. If I'm excited about something, I jump into it all the way. And I got this giant stack of music, all these excerpts and everything to learn for the audition. And I did not touch it. And so I knew before I got there, I was in for something. I knew something was about to shift for me. Something was going to change.
So it sounds like it was a mixed bag, Juilliard.
It was a very mixed bag. What ended up happening was when I got there, right away, really quickly, I realized I don't want to be in an orchestra. I knew that before I got there, but it's the kind of thing where it's like, it's easy to think you don't want to, but then all of a sudden when you're in a room and you're in an orchestra rehearsal with all of these people around you, you look around and it's like, it's not a fantasy anymore. It's like every single one of these people, if anybody's going to wind up in the New York Phil, if anybody's going to wind up in Boston, if anybody's going to wind up in San Francisco, it's going to be one of the people in this room. And being around that, if you're not vibing with it, then that means you really are not cut out. You know what I mean? Like, it's no longer, it's just something that you're thinking, like, I don't want to play in an orchestra. It's like, these are the people that are going to be playing in orchestras. This is what it's like. And if you don't like that, then it's not for you, you know? Mm-hmm. So I figured that out really quick. And I had like a freshman year where it was a big existential crisis. I was like, man, what is even classical? I was thinking about all of these big things that I think anybody that has a background in classical music or jazz in my generation thinks about. It's something that I believe actually marks our generation, which is you have this knowledge of a vast knowledge of Western music, you know, but you live in 2014 and there's all this stuff going on in the business and all this stuff going on creatively, you know, advances in all this technology and everything. But you're sitting there and you hear all this and you love everything that's happening right now because it's you and it's your generation. But you've got this giant catalog of all of this music in your head that for whatever reason your life wound you into this position where you've studied all this stuff. So it's like, well, what the hell do I do with all of this, you know? And
what does it mean to me?
And what does it mean to me? Exactly. I spent years learning how to play the Bach cello suites on an acoustic bass. And here it's 2014 and people are fucking doing wobble bass in dubstep. It's like, why am I sitting here playing an acoustic bass, learning piece of music that was written 350 years ago? But I love it too, you know? So that's what's complicated, because it's one thing if you do that stuff and you're like, well, fuck it, I don't actually like that. But it's another thing if you do it and you're like, I actually love this, but I also understand what's going on right now. So how do you figure that out? And at 18 or 19 years old, for me, the answer was that you don't. Instead, you just go crazy and you're just like, I don't know what to do with all this stuff. Yeah. What is all this stuff? And also the other thing too to mention is that I wasn't allowed to study jazz at Juilliard. So that was the difference between Interlochen and Juilliard, is that they wouldn't let me study multiple things. So I was only studying classical music. And I think that heightened my frustration because I felt really boxed, which isn't their fault. It's just that's how they are and that's how I was, you know? So what ended up happening was I took a sabbatical my sophomore year. I wanted to drop out, but my parents were like, you can't just do that. You should take a sabbatical. So I was still enrolled, but I was just going to take a year off. So what would have been my sophomore year, I studied at the Drummers Collective, which is down on, it's on 18th Street now, but it was on 14th Street, which is sick, man. And they a great like rhythm section style school, kind of like a Berkeley vibe, except only rhythm section. And a lot of the faculty from Berkeley comes down and teaches there. And that was really refreshing for me because they were from a totally different world of music. These were guys that were playing in Broadway. They were playing session musicians. All these guys had played on jingles and hit singles from the 70s and 80s and stuff. And they were from like a rock and roll, funk, jazz fusion type of background, not a straight ahead jazz or not a classical thing. And that was massively refreshing. And I was only playing bass guitar. I didn't play any acoustic bass. It was like, F acoustic bass, I'm playing bass guitar. So I did that, and then I ended up becoming a teacher's assistant there, and they hired me to come in and play with drummers, student drummers. So I was kind of teaching. I mean, not running classes, but like assistant running classes and playing with all the student drummers. And I did that for a whole year, which was incredible, man. And Jaco taught there. So in my mind, I was like, this is a cool lineage to be like a part of, you know?
The footsteps, yeah.
Yeah. And it was cool, man. So I did that for a year. And then I said, man, let's go back to school. Like, let's get this done. I thought I got this out of my system. I'm going to go back and like get a degree. And I should do that. That summer, right before I was going to go back to school and finish my degree like a good boy, I was at a party down on University, like by Thompson Square Park. It was an NYU girl. It was her apartment. So I get there and we go out on her patio to have a cigarette, and it's not a real patio. It's like a balcony that has no like railing, and it's in like a little alley, and she lives on the second floor. And we go out and we're standing on the balcony, and I've been over there like a million times, and there's this little gap between the two sides of the balcony, and I jump between it like a million times. I do it all the time. So we're sitting there, and I'm talking to somebody and I go to jump across the balcony and I slip and I fall. I just landed on the ground and I landed on my stomach.
Oh.
It would totally like shocked my whole system. It was like insane. And I couldn't breathe. Finally, like I kind of start to get my breath a little bit and I crawl up this like pipe on the side of this building and I like crawl out of the gutter. And the whole party's still going on and nobody knows that I fell. So I, being me, I don't want to interrupt the party.
Right.
So I come in and my friend Ross is the only person that knows that this happened. So I crawl back in and I just walk through the party and I'm like, yo, how's it going? How's it going? And I walk straight to the door and I go down in the street and I get in a cab and I go to the hospital because I'm like, I think I fucking like broke my ribs or something. So I go to the hospital. They like give me an x-ray. Nothing's wrong. I didn't break anything. I just bruised a whole bunch of stuff. I don't always tell people that story because I don't really know if that had anything to do with the physical injury that followed that I'll tell you about. It might, I feel like in my mind, how could it not have? Like a trauma to your body like that, it must have. But what ended up happening wasn't immediate, but it was about 2 or 3 months after that, I started to develop like a tingling in my left arm, under my elbow and through my shoulder and in my fingertips. I play upright bass and I've always had tension in my shoulders because it's a physical instrument, and I've always had issues with tightness. Like even my sophomore year, I played a concerto with an orchestra and I had all this tightness in my forearm. So it could have very easily been an overuse thing, but there's no doubt that falling off a fucking balcony has something to do with kicking it all over the edge. But I ended up developing like a really serious, I don't even know what you'd call it, tendonitis or muscle problem in my left arm. And I couldn't play at all. So I went back to school and tried to finish my degree. My arm started just totally locking up and my fingers were going numb and I couldn't play. That mixed with the fact that going back, I realized that nothing had changed. I hadn't actually gotten it out of my system. That whole year sabbatical was like me trying to like expel a demon. Like I'm going to get this out of my system so then I can go back and get a degree and play classical music.
Sow your jazz oats outside of Juilliard so you can go back.
Exactly. Exactly. And I got back and it was not out of my system at all. If anything, it was worse than it was before. So I was more unhappy with the school than I'd ever been. And I had the arm problem. And I was just like, shit, man, like this is bad. So I ended up getting really depressed and my arm hurt. I couldn't play the classes and they said, you've already taken too much time off. So your only option is to drop out. You can't take like a medical leave because you've already taken a year off. So I dropped out and I went back to Michigan and I thought that was like it, So I got really serious, totally changed my whole diet, everything, started doing yoga, trying to figure out what the hell happened to me. Like I was on like a really serious regimen of, reading and exercising and like trying to really figure out what happened to my body. And why am I so like confused about music and stuff? That was when I started to write all the time because I couldn't play. I wanted to learn how to conceive music and understand what was going on with music without an instrument because prior to that, everything was filtered through the bass. If I wanted to write something, I would think about how you would finger it on the bass or what the bowing would be. But I wanted to break away from that because I couldn't play the bass. So I started to just listen to music at the piano with my right hand and then try to do it even away from the piano and try to hear everything, every chord, every instrument, and just analyze. And every time I was in the car, I'd analyze everything that was on the radio. Serious ear training, I guess is what it was. And writing at the same time. After a couple months at home, John Batiste was doing a concert at the New Hampshire Music Festival, the Summer Music Festival, with a big band.
And did you know him from Juilliard?
Yeah, we were like best friends at Juilliard.
Even though you were in the classical program?
Yeah. Oh, man, we used to play all kinds of music in the practice room. Man, we would chill out in the dorms.
So even though you were in the classical scene, you met all the jazz players through the dorms?
Oh yeah, man. And I would jam with them all the time. And they all knew that like I was into jazz. And I would teach them about Bach and stuff and they would teach me about Art Tatum or, whoever.
So Jonathan Batiste is playing in New Hampshire? Is that where he was playing?
Yeah, he's playing in New Hampshire and he was like, we need an arranger for the big band. Do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, because at this point I was really writing a lot. So that was my first gig as a composer or an arranger. And I made all the charts. It was so stressful. But that was like arranging 101, you know, and I learned how to arrange for a big band. Lauren Schoenberg, who's the director of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem and a really esteemed jazz musician and ran a big band for years. He's done everything, you know. He was working at Juilliard for a long time as well. And he was like, if you can arrange like this and you can play bass and stuff, like you should, you know, see what's going on at Juilliard or MSM, or you should study more, you know, jazz. And I said, yeah, cool. And right around that time, Carl Allen contacted me and he said, we don't have a bass player for this coming year at Juilliard. And this was in August, and the school year was starting in like 3 weeks. And he was like, we still don't have a bass player for the jazz division this year because they only have one each year. You know, it's a very small department. And he said, you know, I've heard that you play jazz as well, and I know that you were here in the classical division. Do you want to audition? And I said, yeah. So I made a tape. John helped me. We made a tape. I came back and I auditioned, and he said, yeah, great, you're in. So then I came back, and that's how it worked out to be in the jazz division. So I did a semester in the jazz division. Then the arm injury came back. And then all of the depression and existential crisis came back with that after one semester.
Yeah.
Everybody probably thought I was fucking nuts at that school because, you know, I had gone through all this shit and I had been in and out. And then finally I had this miraculous rebound where now I'm back. And it's like, it should be awesome, you know. And then the whole arm injury comes back again. And just the mental just overwhelmedness and just feeling not in the right place all came back too, which was no doubt connected. Withdrew again, huge mess with credits and everything. And that time when I went back to Michigan, that is the most depressed I've ever been in my life. And I collapsed on the floor of my kitchen and I'm just crying, and my parents were like, it's all right. Like, you know, you got to figure out what you're doing. I totally stopped playing music. That was how I wound up at the University of Toledo, because it was right by my parents' house. I studied geology and psychology. No music except for jazz piano class, and that is how I met Tim Whalen.
My man, Tim Whalen.
Yeah.
My friend from college, Tim Whalen. The man I referred to as Sergeant Major 7 Flat 5.
He's
in
an
the
Army
U.S.
man now.
Army.
Yeah. But yeah, amazing jazz pianist who went to Manhattan School of Music, and he was teaching there just for 2 years, and we hit it off. And then that was the most interesting period of my life and the most hard period of my life.
One of the things that I'm hearing, starting from when you were in middle school and all the way through the Juilliard experience, is that the most significant development that happens for you is self-directed. It seems like you got a lot of shit together on your own.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the kind of common rap on you is Juilliard.
Right.
And the education component that, oh, this is a seriously trained musician.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the image that's out there.
Yeah.
And it's true. But actually hearing you tell the story, a lot of it is very personal. It's
very, very personally directed, man. I mean, I'm very thankful to have come up in the conservatory environment. You know, I've been around amazing musicians ever since I was 15, all day, every day. It's only until now, like years later, that I really understand and appreciate how amazing of a thing that is. And I think that's why now I'm very proud of coming from that conservatory background. But it's never defined me, you know. It really never has. And also, I'll be very honest. It's a PR thing too. It's like, it's a name drop, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's in no disrespect to anybody. I mean, I loved a lot of the teachers that I had at Juilliard. I think Juilliard's great. I think Interlochen is amazing. I'm still in touch with all of those people. The administration at Interlochen, I'm very close with. You know, I love those people. I love elements of academia. I think it's just, for me, I started to really learn how I learn, to say that again. I mean, that's the most important thing. And
I think one of the complicated and wonderful parts of your story is the injury. Because if it hadn't been for the injury, it would have been easy to define yourself primarily as a bass player.
Yeah.
And I know that you still ask yourself how much of your identity is connected to being a bass player.
Right.
But the injury, it seems like, kind of forced you to confront the other part of yourself, which was not only as a bass player. I mean, I only met you a couple of years ago, and I remember the night we met, and you said to me, I believe that if you're going to play the bass, you should play the whole bass. Does that sound like something you would say?
Yeah, I know, but now when you say it back, it's just like, oh my God, what a schmuck.
No, man, it's not that at all. It's just to say, like, I believe that the bass is not necessarily there to be a kind of a secondary element in the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do still agree with that. I do. As time went on, I felt like I always had the capacity to be more of a holistic musician, you know. And the more I started to identify role models, like, again, bringing it back to Edgar Meyer, it's like, I love Edgar Meyer's bass playing. I think he's probably the greatest bass player alive, but it's not about that. He's a holistic musician. He composes amazing music. He has a knowledge of orchestration. He has a knowledge of different genres of music. He plays bass at an extremely high level, and all of it is just who he is. It's like his personality explodes through everything that he does. And those are the kind of people that I started to become more and more drawn to. I mean, I think nowadays my two biggest inspirations are Leonard Bernstein and Quincy Jones. And both of those people have these sort of Renaissance man qualities to them that I've just always gravitated towards and always really admired. You know, Leonard Bernstein wrote music for many different mediums, you know, for theater. He wrote concert music. He performed as a concert pianist. He would play concertos. He conducted. He produced, you know. He was involved in business aspects of things. He was a teacher. Those are the kind of people that I started to become more and more drawn to. And I think, I don't know if I would have had the courage to pursue that had it not been for the arm injury and all of the crisis that surrounded, because it kind of forced me to acknowledge that there's these people out there that I actually really admire. And I know that I have something to do with that legacy, so to speak. Like, I know I have a place in that world of that type of musician. That's sort of an all-around diverse type of musician. And I always just really loved that. And so I think the arm injury sort of kicked me into that. Yeah.
So let's talk about what happened when you dropped out of college then.
Yeah.
And after you went to Toledo.
Okay. So I had a big moment in my parents' living room after a semester at the University of Toledo, and I was like, I can't keep doing this, you know, which was a really scary realization because I was 22 at that time, and I had 1 year of college credits. If I were to go back, I mean, if I would have gone back to college, I would have just graduated. And I'm 27 now. And it's like, I think about the way that my life has gone, and I can't imagine having just graduated. That would have been insane. And I knew that even at that time. I was like, this is insane. Like, I can't do this. But I was really in between a rock and a hard place because I had never thought that I'd be somebody that would not have a degree. I mean, I'm not against it, but I just never thought that would be me. And I was sitting there in Michigan with zero connections anymore because it all blew up in my face at college. You know, all the other kids at college were meeting professors, and the professors were hooking them up with gigs and signing with talent agencies and stuff. And I didn't have any of that shit. All my friends from Juilliard were doing fantastically. And I was so proud of them. But at the same time, I couldn't help but be like, fuck, man. Like, I'm sitting in Michigan, you know, like with a bum arm with no degree at the University of Toledo studying rocks. You know, I'm like, what the hell is this? It was deep, man. It was a deep time. And it was just one of those moments that you have. I was like, I'm either going to take the plunge or I'm not. I just kind of let go of the fear, and I just said, you know what? Regardless of what happens, it's not going to be any worse than what's happened to me already. Like, I just had this whole dream scenario going that just exploded. I don't have anything to lose. You know, the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to show up and I don't get any gigs and I have to work some other job. So whatever. I know I don't want to be in Michigan. So I moved back to New York. I got a job at DSW. I was the janitor in the Union Square flagship DSW. It's the biggest DSW.
I mean, it is important. It's, you know, let's face it. If you're going to be the janitor at the DSW, let it be at the flagship store.
Let it be at the flagship DSW. There was some class there. Yeah. that was brutal too, man, because sometimes kids from Juilliard would come in to buy shoes.
For the give gig shoes.
Yeah, man. And I'd be sitting there cleaning the floor, and it was just like, oh shit, man. Like, oh shit, I haven't seen that kid for like 3 years, and I'm cleaning the fucking floor.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I did that, and I was teaching for like 2 or 3 different non-for-profits. I taught a preschool music class for a while. A class of like 22 preschool kids. They were like 3 years old. I mean, like even talking about this now, I'm like, was that seriously my life? It was the New York hustle quintessentially, like to the nth degree. I was working like 50 different jobs. I was living in a $500 a month room in Queens, burning the candle at all ends and really trying to make it happen. And neglecting all social or personal life. Like I wasn't doing anything that wasn't related to trying to figure out how the fuck to have a career in music. That's the only thing I was thinking about. And around that time, I met Matt McCorkle, the amazing sound engineer, and he was working at Tainted Blue, which is now Terminus, a studio in Times Square.
And it was originally the top floor of Quad.
Yes, in the Quad building, the building that Tupac got shot in the first time. And it's the top floor. It's the penthouse there. And so Matt was their head engineer there, and I met him at a session with John, actually.
With John Batiste.
Yeah. And then Matt and I became really, really good friends, and we started to do a lot of work together, commercial work and other types of work where I would write the songs and he would produce the songs. And that was like a really important relationship to make at that time, because I was doing all of this stuff and running around and teaching and cleaning floors and doing whatever the hell I could do. And then I also, through John Batiste, met an amazing theater director, Sahim Ali. We started to make a whole bunch of different theater projects. So in the midst of this like wild period of living the crazy New York lifestyle, I met these 2 figures that ended up evolving into the 2 biggest things that are going on in my life now. This sort of theater component through Sahim and this recorded music component through Matt.
So let's take those apart one at a time, starting with the Matt McCorkle experience. Ultimately, that led to CDZA.
Yeah, it did. Matt and I had already been working for about a year together on different commercials, just writing songs and stuff and just hanging and recording. And I was sort of trying to figure out, am I a songwriter? Am I a composer? Like, what am I doing with all this stuff? And we were kind of working together. Around that time, I met Joe Sabia, who's sort of an internet guru, I would say. Just somebody that always made online videos on YouTube and has always been really, really brilliant conceptualist and has done a lot of client-based work and a lot of just original work as well. And he asked me to score a commercial that he was working on. We worked on this commercial. Joe had just moved from LA, so he was new to New York. And he said, man, like I've always been fascinated by classical music. I've never met people that really make music as a profession. I'm so fascinated by this culture. I've always been looking for musicians to collaborate with, but I could never find them in LA. And I'm just so excited about this. And he's like, we should do something other than just these commercial projects. We should, make something. And I was like, well, yeah, man, for sure. And I was doing a million things at this point, playing gigs, composing theater stuff, all over the place. But I was like, yeah, man, like, let's do it. So Joe was like, I've always had this idea of making a medley of songs that don't have real lyrics. So like la 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 or sha la la or do a diddy diddy dum diddy do. I was like, that is the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my life. But I thought it was hysterical and I thought it was really fun. So I was just like, great. So I went over to his apartment and he had all of these ideas for songs because he's really brilliant with that, like tapping into sort of cultural tokens, figuring out how to find all of those online. So he had this giant list of all these songs. And so I basically took them all and compiled them and helped him make musical sense out of them, And so we worked together for hours one night, just sort of putting this thing together. And the whole time just like looking at each other like this is the stupidest thing ever, but also really getting a kick out of it. So Joe was like, well, we should do this. And so we got John Batiste to play piano, and Joe knew a girl named Jane Louie who has a lot of success on YouTube, a great singer from LA. He got both of them involved. he said, well, we need a place to do this. And I said, well, Matt runs this studio in Times Square, so we should get Matt involved. We got together, we did this, took 2 hours, we put it up online, and it got like 600,000 views like within a day. And immediately we were like, man, we've got something here. So we were like, well, let's make more of these, you know?
And in this video, you and John are wearing light up star sunglasses.
John is wearing a like masquerade mask, almost like an Eyes Wide Shut,
yeah,
like
Eyes Wide
Stanley
Shut,
Kubrick
exactly.
style mask, and I am wearing. They had a New Year's party like the year before, and in the studio, like laying around from the 2011 New Year's party, were these like 2011 light up glasses. And so again, man, John and I were playing. I was playing with John at Dizzy's Club that week. He was doing a week-long thing at Dizzy's Club. That night we had a gig, and we had already been around each other for the whole week, and it was like in the middle of the week. We had just seen each other the night before, and we'd gone to bed at like 4 a.m. or something, and we were showing up at the studio at like 9 or 10. And so I just showed up, and there's glasses were there, and I was just like, yeah, like whatever, I don't care, like fuck it, I'm gonna put these on.
You guys are, I mean, there's obviously in that video, there's something going on where you don't give a fuck. And in a way, I think that
it became the credo.
That persona, I mean, honestly, that persona that you have, that CDZA persona, is totally you, but dialed up on another level.
That's funny.
The awkward laughter at the end of the videos, all of that stuff, it's like, it's totally your sense of humor, but it's also become this in-joke within the CDZA videos of this weirdo sense of humor of yours.
And you know, it's cool to hear that it comes across like that, because really what it is it's whatever me and Matt and Joe have always thought is really funny. It started off as us originally, but people like Mark Sidney Johnson, the guitar player, Alan Medner, the drummer, Charles Yang, amazing violin player, Sam Ryder, amazing pianist and accordionist. All of those guys, as soon as it started to develop and they started to come into the fold more and started to kind of, you know, understand what we were trying to do, and then really like where it's at now is that they have so much input and energy behind it all too. But it's all just about whatever we think is funny. That's what it is. You know, it's just all like, if we all look at each other and we say, man, this is ridiculous, and we all just can't stop laughing, then that's what we're going to do. That's the video to do.
So you did the first video, it got 600,000 hits the first day or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then how did it turn into like this proper business, this proper YouTube channel?
Well, it was a really gradual process. I mean, it still is. It's been a very, very slow build. But basically, you know, we started to get backing and started to get support from, we did a bunch of different branded projects with other people, support from YouTube, support from the music community, various organizations, and it just sort of started to gradually build to a point where we were able to kind of sustain it. You know, we were able to say, come, do this shoot, you know, we can throw you some money. We were able to rent the studio regularly. We were able to do enough things to kind of keep it going, you know. We started to do live performances, and CDZA is something that for Matt and Joe and I is at varying times like a percentage of our lives. All of us sort of have careers outside of that, but we all kind of come together to make this thing. I mean, I think in the first year of CDZA, it was very, very, very dominating. I think all of us were putting 90% of our time into CDZA. At other points, it kind of backs down to 50% or 60%, but it's always sort of on a steady burn. And that's what's been really cool about it, is that we kind of, it's like a sanctuary. It's like a place where we all come together to do this one very specific, ridiculous thing that's amazing and has given us all a really beautiful sense of community. And for the other musicians that are involved too, I mean, we're all from the classical world and the jazz world and the Broadway world, and that was always what I was really passionate about, and we were all really passionate about, is that like we were talking about earlier, it's like you come out and you've got all of this music in your head, and what are you supposed to do with that? How do you get other people to care about that or to understand that, you know? And with Matt and Joe, they really understood how to say like, okay, awesome, cool, you guys are really good at playing classical music, or you're really great at playing jazz, but what if we packaged it like this? What if we did this? What if we infused it with this? And that's what really started to light it on fire, you know, and that's what's really great about it now is that all these people come together and are able to come together. They have a platform that people will say, wow, that was Bach. Whoa, you know, that was really cool. Or people will say, you know, that was the history of misheard lyrics. And I've never seen so many songs strung together at the same time. And I've never seen people really singing, you know, like.
It's interesting, right? Because it's sort of like what you talk about with that first video, going back to that first video, that in a way it's almost like a musical parlor trick. There's some CDZA videos that you do with Charles Yang where you're out on the street and you just ask people to put a little quarter in a bucket, and depending on what pile they put their money on.
The human jukebox.
Yeah. You play Lady Gaga or Michael Jackson or
Bach.
It's so impressive to people that you're able to do that and turn on a dime.
Right.
And it is impressive, but it's also, you know, it's actually a very small part of what you can really do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, you know, in the online world, I mean, it goes to show you, like, a lot of people don't understand everything that goes on in music. And so opening the door and inviting people, you know, not being on such a high horse and saying like, yeah, well, I know about Bach. So if you don't, well, then whatever, you know, like if you don't pick up on this phrasing that I'm doing, well, then you don't get it. And instead just saying like, look, that's cool. If you don't know who Bach is, that's cool. We're going to play it on the street and you can speed it up and slow it down. And, you know, to use the word parlor trick, I think that's where it's dangerous. If you as a musician start to believe this is it and nobody else can do this, I think that's where you start to kind of lose touch a little bit. I mean, it is a parlor trick, but I believe that if you understand what it is and what that can be useful for and what value can come from that, then that's a really beautiful thing, because through that, as a musician, saying like, oh yeah, that's just like a superficial thing, that's not a big deal. But to other people, it could open up a whole world where they say, wow, that's really cool. And it grabs people's attention in a way where they say, I'm curious about Bach, or I'm curious about what the difference is between Lady Gaga and Michael Jackson, you know. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that I am always from the mind that you've got to try something to really be able to talk about it. And the truth is, I didn't know what it would be like to go out in the street and put tip jars out and let people dictate what you do. So you can say what you want about it. You know, like we've done the Human Jukebox live before, and it's very weird sometimes and it's awkward, and I don't know how I feel about it all the time. But in that moment on the street when we made the video on that day, it was a true experiment, and it was genuinely us putting ourselves out there and saying what will happen. And that's the magic of the video. Whether you are into music or not, whatever level you're understanding it on, the truth is that we went out into Brooklyn on an afternoon and we really did that. And that's, to me, was really fascinating. And I think it was fascinating to at least some other people too, you know.
You have millions and millions of views on these videos. Mm-hmm. So it obviously resonates with people.
Yeah.
And when I say it's a parlor trick, I don't mean it in any way to belittle it, only to say, after having studied so deeply,
right,
to think such a simple idea could resonate. You and I on other occasions have talked about the idea of maybe your generation being the first generation to be raised with all musical genres at once, being sort of aware of all popular music and being responsible for all popular music as a student of music. You know? And CDZA actually has really made an effort to outline the history of popular X, popular Y, popular music, popular history of wooing men, wooing women, whistled music, you know, the history of the bass, the history of, but ultimately at the heart of it, I think, is this idea that all of it is equally present in your life at the same time.
Yeah.
The music of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 90s, it's all kind of...
It's all there.
It's all there.
I believe that we are the generation of context. I can't speak for everybody, but I'll speak for myself in saying that it's less about what's the next sound, and it's more about, man, there's already so many fucking sounds that exist. What's a new context that I could put it in? There's just infinite amount of sound, and people have already done so many things with it. So for me, it's more about juxtaposing all of these idiosyncrasies from these different vernaculars, if you will. It's not about how do I make a new blues riff. It's, well, what if I just took this classic whoa boop booby whoa ho, but I put it over
house beat or
exactly a house beat, and then I put it with a chord progression from Mozart, and then I put a hook over the top of it that sounds like Katy Perry, or it's like that. To me is more what it's about now. It's less about trying to create new sounds. It's more about trying to
recontextualize those sounds.
Recontextualize the sounds, exactly. And then through that, you make a new sound. And so I think with CDZA, it's a little more blatant of a version of that. It's like mosaics, basically. It's like creating mosaics or narratives, cultural narratives, out of a canon of popular American music that we all know and that we can all relate to. Relatability is so important because that's how you access a lot of human emotion. It's like when somebody feels comfortable, when somebody can compare whatever you're doing to something else, that makes them feel more comfortable, and it opens up a lot of their sensory experience. It opens up a lot of their ability to experience if you can tap into a familiarity,
To shift gears a little bit, you just mentioned a moment ago the idea of context and shifting context. And I think it's actually a good segue into the theater work that you're doing, because you've written two kind of major theatrical works, and both of them basically involved recontextualizing music to some degree or another. One of them involves African music in a kind of a jazz context, and the other involves Haitian music being repurposed.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about those two projects?
Terrell Mccraney, who's an amazing force in the theater world. He just won a MacArthur Genius Grant a few months ago. He's been a good friend for a few years, an amazing person, playwright primarily so far, and now he's sort of venturing into the directing world. He was working with the RSC, the Royal Shakespeare Company, in the UK for a few years as sort of a resident playwright, as I understand it. And so one of the things that he began to develop while he was there was a revision of Antony and Cleopatra. All of the lines were more or less untampered with, but a lot of the scenes were edited out and rearranged. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like a remix.
Of Shakespeare.
Of Shakespeare. So none of the words are altered, but a lot of the scenes are cut out and a lot of the scenes are rearranged. And the setting is completely rearranged. So what he did was made this version of Antony and Cleopatra that, rather than taking place in Egypt and Rome, takes place a little bit later on the eve of the Haitian slave revolution. And so we're talking about like the late 1700s, 1791, 1792. Cleopatra, rather than being from Egypt, is from Haiti. Antony, rather than being from Rome, is from Napoleonic France. And so you've got all of these really interesting juxtapositions politically and culturally that were happening in that time between France and Haiti, and Haiti sort of revolting against the French structure that's sort of been put on it, and all of the political things that were going on in the original context of Antony and Cleopatra. So Terrell sort of brilliantly silkscreened one story on top of each other. And it's this really amazing pivoting that happens between these two cultures, like on a dime, between these two continents. Terrell and I have been friends for a number of years now, and when the project first started to come to fruition, asked me if I would be involved in it. And I said, yeah, of course. But at that point, it was sort of far away from actually happening. And then when it came together, he said, this is really happening. I'd love for you to be involved. And I thought, hey, man, this would be spectacular. I'd love to work with you.
And you wrote a kind of Haitian-inspired music.
Yeah, it's not traditional Haitian music by any means, nor is it traditional French Baroque music. It's influenced by that tradition, but it's really sort of in a world of its own. And that's something that we talked about really extensively, is we didn't want to make a museum piece, but we wanted it to be very authentic, that's the challenge, is like, I'm a dude from the Midwest, so it's already a challenge to tap into a music from a different time period and from a different place in the world, but then also to not just mimic that music, but to really kind of capture the essence of it and then create original music out of that, you know?
But see, that's where I think your approach to recontextualizing music serves you in these experiences. And actually, when you listen to so much of the great Broadway music from the sort of original Broadway musicals that we love, they made a lot of shit up.
Yeah, they did.
And pretended that it was
totally,
real.
Totally. Man, it's a great point. And that's one of the reasons why I am super drawn to theater, is because theater is all about channeling something. It's like, no, you're not fooling anybody. It's like, I'm not from Haiti. I'll never be from Haiti. But that's not what theater is about. What theater is about is respecting and cherishing a genre or a story and allowing yourself to channel it. So it's not about becoming that. It's about loving it to a point that you can filter it through yourself, you know? And that's what's really cool, man, because like nowadays, you know, I'm going to write Haitian music or any kind of like groove oriented music from a couple hundred years ago and it's going to go on the radio or something. I mean, maybe, but probably not. But theater is this place where all of a sudden it's magical. Same thing with the French Baroque elements in the music. You play that stuff in a concert hall and everybody's like, this is boring. Like, I don't want to go see that. But you put it in the theater all of a sudden and it's a new context. It's context, man, you know? Yep. And same thing with the African show, Goddess, that was in Connecticut last summer. That would a different separate project. I mean, it's the same thing. That's beautiful music. It is a phenomenal culture of music. It's incredible. One of the best, one of the richest ever. And
because that's based in Africa.
It takes place in Africa, yeah. And, you know, that music, to put it in theater, all of a sudden it just brings an accessibility and a vibrance that a lot of people, at least in America, might not register if you heard it on the radio or if you heard it in a concert at a club or something.
Well, that was the thing. When you played me some of the initial pieces that you were writing for Goddess, I remember saying to you, man, you are like operating in a new genre that you invented some shit, man. You know, I thought it was going to be way more sort of like out of the Fela vibe.
Yeah.
And it wasn't at all. It was a totally different sound that you found.
Well, hey, man, I appreciate you saying that. Thanks, man.
No, but you know that you chose not to sort of emulate.
To me, it's almost more disrespectful to play somebody's music that lived a long time ago and try to play it like they would, rather than just playing it like yourself. That's so my opinion. And I respect people that think about it differently. But to me, it's like, I'm never going to be, I'm not Fela. I don't know what it was like to hear Afrobeat coming out of the shrine where he played. I don't have any idea. I've never been to Ghana. So why am I going to try to make it sound like that? Like that, to me, that's so much less magical and so much more like almost arrogant. I'm going to listen to it and I'm going to hear it the way that I hear it, and I'm going to be blown away by it and I'm going to love it. And then I'm going to take whatever inspiration that is and I'm going to make whatever I can make out of it, you know?
Man, that thing about hearing it the way you hear it, I think is so key. And as a composer, we have a sound in our head that we hear. And everybody hears things differently. Given that, I mean, when it comes time to actually write, we're all going to hear a different melody, a different thing that leads us. Yeah. Maybe some of us come together and, you know, the Lennons and the McCartneys that come together and they merge and write great songs together is because what they're hearing is more or less in line with each other.
Right.
Or complementary.
Ooh, yeah.
But generally we all hear our own thing. And I know I personally struggle to like really honor what I hear in my head and not get too hung up.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, that's a phenomenally insightful way to put it. You do hear a very specific thing in your head, and I struggle with that big time. But here's the thing. What I've discovered so far, out of all of the obstacles that I have yet to mount and probably never will, one thing that I've really, really, really gotten over is that sound that you hear in your head, the thing that you're talking about, you hear a sound so specifically. It's such a direct idea. If you don't put it out exactly the way that you hear it in your head, exactly, then what happens is It's so clear in your head that you think the rest of the world hears it that way.
That clearly.
And so then, as a creative person, you're like, well, man, that's cliched. So I'm not going to do that because that's too obvious. Anytime you hear something crystal clear in your head, it's cohesive because it's truth. It's honest. You really hear something, and from really hearing that, it's just a fact. It's like you hear this, and so it's clear and it's cohesive and it's understandable. And if you fuck with that and you start to say, oh man, no, I've got to do this and I've got to change it. What you're doing is creating an abstraction of an abstraction because everybody else has never heard what you're thinking about. So it's already abstract. But if you put it out in its pure form, everybody's going to get it right away. But if you don't, then it's like you're taking something that's already abstract that nobody's ever heard before, and then you're convoluting it even more.
Yeah.
And it's just like that's when you get into some really, really bad music. That's when you start making stuff that doesn't make any sense to anybody.
The way I hear that is you have an obligation to be yourself. In all cases, in every way, you have an obligation to be yourself. There is nobody who will ever be more you than you are.
Amen. Amen, man. Amen. And that's the thing is that, when I was younger, I didn't think about that. I thought that being yourself, like doing exactly what I want to do, was an egotistical thing or was a giant leap of faith or something like, whoa, this is really wild. But the honest truth is that there's nothing else to do. There's nothing else to do except just be yourself. It's like, that's my vibe. Like, this is what I hear.
You don't really have a choice.
You don't have a choice. Yeah, man. So you can either expound like twice as much energy fighting against it, or you can just be like, well, whatever, and just kind of go with it. And then the stuff resonates more because it's a unique perspective. It's an unadulterated, like very unique perspective,
Man, I love talking to you. I wish we could talk for another 2 hours, but I guess it seems like you have really been letting life kind of unfold in the last couple of years and just saying yes, everything that's interesting to you, you say yes, you follow it up, you do the work. Do you have a sense what you would like to do next, where you want this to go?
Man, there's a sound, talking about a sound that's in your head. There's a sound that I hear, and I want to try to pursue it at all costs. It happens in different places. Like, I have a bunch of different projects right now. I'm writing for theater, CDZA. I'm writing a concerto for John and Charles and I. I don't know exactly where I'm going to stumble upon it, but through all these things, as dispersed as it is, there's a really clear through line, which is just a sound. It's like a musical sound. It probably sounds so ridiculous, but it's a very specific way that I hear music. That's really my biggest objective, is to, through all this stuff, kind of arrive at a sound that I really enjoy and that it feels really honest and that everybody else really enjoys. That's like musically the biggest objective. And I also want to really always have a lot of fun and try to get everybody else to have as much fun as possible.
Man, I hear that. You are, like I said at the beginning, man, you are a contagious motherfucker, man. You should walk in the room and everybody's going to feel good. There's no question about that.
Well, hey, man.
I can't wait to hear what the sound is. And
Me too.
Michael T., thank you so much.
Hey, Leo, it was a pleasure, man. Thank you.